You go first to do the assessment.
Right.
Can you tell me about your specific experience in the tsunami for the assessment?
Right. Well, once you arrive, you realize the amount of devastation and the amount of carnage, bodies that are just strewn all over in the mass graves. So you've got to work through that process with the people who are local, helping them to see some hope in the assistance that can be provided and brought into work along their side. So my responsibility in my office is not to come in and take charge, but to be a servant to the local community and leadership so that we are providing some ideas, some understanding, some capacity to increase their ability to serve on a local basis. And that really was my responsibility, opening up facilities that we had for immediate shelter and feeding, finding immediate clinic opportunities, bringing in mobile clinics that could get out into the outskirts with qualified personnel to meet immediate needs, and in the process, find out and take a pulse of what's happening in the communities that are around the affected areas. More than not, people who are in the tsunami floodlines are moving away from that community quickly. They're losing track of family and children, and so the business of figuring out where they've gone, how to push services out into the smaller communities so that they are being addressed, it becomes a vital role.
So how did you tackle that challenge, reaching out to these fleeting population as well as access to the rural areas?
Yeah, you first get into the infrastructure that the Salvation Army has. Salvation Army was in Sri Lanka and Indonesia for more than 100 years, so there was a quality group of Sri Lankans and Indonesian personnel who work and minister with the Salvation Army. Those are the first people that you get a hold of. They become interpreters, they know the communities, they know the faces and the people in those communities, they know the populations that have changed, so they become a sort of a resource hub to take a closer look at the needs, begin the community communication and development aspects so we can figure out means by which to rebuild their communities that they actually live in.
And you were saying that you were still working in some of the islands in the region.
Yes.
The quality of the work and the content of the programs have changed, I imagine, dramatically. Right? So
they have.
A little bit about what happens early on and how the transition takes place, and what are some of the programs that the Salvation Army is involved in.
Obviously, with the tsunami in those particular areas, housing became a real concern, to rebuild housing. So communication with the Muslim communities, with the Buddhist communities, became key for us to be allowed by leadership and by community to go in and assess, bring engineers, and to rebuild for men and women in those communities. We've built 1,500 homes. But because the activity of the Salvation Army was good at education, good at bringing together leaders in the community for conversation, because we enabled them to have microfinance projects to build some capacity of their own. They have invited the Salvation Army to remain for another 10 years and become more intricate in the daily activities of the community. I think it's a marvelous example of an outside NGO moving into a community and allowing themselves to simply be the servant of the people who are working there and not feel threatened by any outside organization moving in.
That's a great example of something that has worked very well.
It has.
Could you give us more examples of other things that have worked well in the response recovery phase, as well as some of the things that could have been improved?
Some of the other successes, I think, when we move into Samoa, we realized that some of the people who had homes built on the sand, right on the waterfront, needed to relocate for higher ground and get away from flood levels. We were able to give them instruction, bring engineers or individuals in, professors who are schooled in that particular function, to teach them how to use the natural resources of the islands. So they were using coconut to build a base to lift homes up off the ground, so that as rainy season came, waters would go under their tents, under their shelters, and not through their shelters. Those were great successes, and really to give that kind of an understanding, education to the local population for them to learn and to recreate on a mass basis throughout the island, I think was instrumental. I also think that on the negative side, when you go into communities and my white face approaches community, culture says whatever he says, we should agree with. And so it's interesting to see people say, anything you say, Major Polarek. But then when you ask the same question through the local interpreter, the response is different, because they're responding to someone from their own culture. So our failing at sometimes is making an American response everywhere we go, and failing to consider this as a cultural response, a local response where they have input. One of the other mistakes I think we've made in past is not taking in consideration of the women who are in those particular situations or communities. They are usually the ones who have the power and voice. You will not see them standing in front of you. It's culturally unacceptable. But if you can have a conversation with them on the side, an enormous amount of information can be obtained and digested in order to give greater service to the community itself. In Indonesia, we took bold steps to give ownership of the facilities that we were building and make them in the name of the women, which was never heard of in Indonesia. Women were not owners of any property. But if you wanted to have the property, the wife's name or the woman's name needed to be on that letter of ownership. So in a sense, we began the ability to change culture and to give greater emphasis to the female populations throughout the region.
You mentioned a collaboration with UPS that was very successful. Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, UPS is not only a great partner in their ability to manage our product. When we have product that is requested from the incident command system in Haiti or any of the affected areas, we can consolidate that material. UPS delivers it. They deliver is a good kind of a phrase to understand. UPS has been a good partner to the Salvation Army. But cutting-edge technology that is already available to delivery companies like that have never really been used in disasters. UPS has a track point system where you can literally know where your package is anywhere in the world. You click on it, and a computer will immediately track it and know where it is between point A and point B. Well, if it works for packages, why won't it work in the management system for a camp that has 20,000 people, some 4,000 families? So we approached UPS, and they gave us a $20,000 grant to put together a package that will track the entire population. That happened in 2 days, having families computerized. Everybody received a card and a lanyard to keep it safe from weather. We had then the ability to just scan and know immediately who they were, how many people were in a family, and when they were with us last. In fact, the scanning process took less time than the actual distribution. Distribution to the families became more bogged down because people were processed much faster than to have to do a paper system. And so UPS has been instrumental, and right now I'm sure other NGOs have been knocking at our door to find out more about that technology, and I sense that in future crises and disasters, that particular track point technology will be used around the globe.
So you got a lot of information regarding which families were where in terms of location, whether they had been fed, when was the last time. Was that information used in other parts of the system, inventory-wise, procurement points, or distribution?
No, actually, we're too new in the process to try to tackle more aspects of it. But I think aftercare will give us the ability to see how it can be used in other areas. We do have the ability to use it in Jacmel of Haiti and Pétaguave. So we know as families move, we can pick them up in other distribution sites and know that they've moved. Now, how key is it that NGOs who don't usually communicate with each other have a database shared, and they know if this person's been to the Salvation Army or if this person has been to another NGO, and they have a consolidated understanding of where they have migrated and moved in order to find additional services and ability to create endurance for the rest of the disaster.
One of the things that you alluded to in your presentation was this competition for scarce resources, right? So finding a hotel room in Port-au-Prince was impossible. And also during the tsunami, there were competition for scarce resources such as trucks. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience, some of the challenges, how do we address them?
Those are challenges because you're in competition with the world, and media is such a now moment. They want to get the digital photo or the digital information and immediately beam it back for real-time reporting. The difficulty in a place like Haiti that has extremely limited resources is the people who are actually providing the service, who are actually giving stories to the media, are the individuals who are suffering more than anyone else because of the hotel rooms, because of the lack of food that's available to feed those individuals. And of course, when you're looking at transportation, media would be hiring people to take them around from place to place, which means there are fewer people to take the disaster individuals from place to place for their own assessments and the ability to work. So our responsibility is to find those vendors, bring in the vehicles if need be. If the matter is serious enough to purchase a vehicle, I mean, if you rent a vehicle for $300 to $200 a day, perhaps over 6 months, it would have been wiser to purchase the vehicle in the first place and to leave that vehicle as a capacity builder for local leadership in the future.
Could we be doing more, or things that we could be doing differently, both industry and academia partnerships with the organizations in the humanitarian sector?
Well, I think in the preparation side of things, I think academia could assist in standardizing training. I've been to quite a few disasters, and the location changes, but the need pretty much stays the same. You pretty much know what you're going to need to do when you get in there with food, shelter, immediate medical concerns. You've got the cluster meetings you've got to get to for communication. There may even be an opportunity for a standardized training program. Sphere, for example, has that kind of an understanding, an internationally accepted code of conduct, the ability to take one standard and use it anywhere on the globe, to have a training program that would almost meet those kinds of standards, that people can say, here is an opportunity for you to be trained. If you're trained in this, it is not a Red Cross program, it is not a Salvation Army program, but it's a program that can be used internationally with any NGO that is on site active in a disaster. I think industry and business and academia can team up together to make that a standard by which all NGOs can line up and say we are now shoulder to shoulder in the effort rather than separate and individual when it comes to training and performance.
When you think about resources being allocated to different phases of a response, right? So from the emergency phase all the way to the recovery and reconstruction, where do you see the Salvation Army allocating more time or more resources?
Most of the resources that have been collected will be in the rebuilding. So we'll have the ability to go back in and try to rebuild clinics throughout the country, rebuild schools throughout the country. Salvation Army in Haiti, for example, is the largest population of school children. In Port-au-Prince at our compound, our school has 1,500 children who attended on a daily basis. OVC, Orphans and Vulnerable Children, we have those locations and orphanages throughout the country, so we'll try to rebuild those. Not to rebuild Salvation Army facilities, but to rebuild livelihoods for the people of Haiti. So the monies that have been collected are not for Salvation Army facilities. That's a strong emphasis that I give to my own leadership on a local basis and here in the United States. It is really to rebuild the livelihoods and give potential ability for local community to create capacity, increase capacity, so that they are making an income that can sustain themselves and future generations to come.
Well, so some other organizations have the opposite problem. I mean, it sounds like the majority of the money raised will go to the reconstruction and recovery phase.
Right.
Do you think that that's specific to the Salvation Army and the work that you do? Or are the different donors that you approach, that they understand the need? Because some other organizations have the opposite, right? So they are very heavily upfront in the emergency phase. That usually anything associated with capacity building and infrastructure might be interpreted as inefficiency and overhead.
Right. Well, remember, too, that the Salvation Army has a long standing position in most communities around the world. I mean, we're in 120 countries, so the infrastructure is already there. So we want to give support to that infrastructure, knowing that in Haiti, we were there for 50 years before the earthquake. We will be there for 50 or more years after the earthquake. We want to be sure that our ability to invest in their capacity gives strength to those future years. So the Salvation Army has always looked to the future and given credence to that. We have also thought that there are agencies who are very short-term, and that's fine. That's their purpose. They create an income-generating machine that will give great importance to the immediate response. Salvation Army will work with those organizations and agencies so that we can transition with them, so that at the end of 45 days, if their mandate says to pull out, we're there earlier so that we can help transition our own services, our own activities, to make their efforts something of a long-lasting resilience to the community itself as well. So I don't think we want to look at the short-term aspects of that, but assist those who are there for a short term in thinking long-term, transitioning, how can other NGOs fill in the gaps and push the success of a community forward.
I guess that requires a lot of coordination and partnerships with these organizations that stay for a short
Right.
period of time.
Yeah, communication is key not only on the ground with local leadership, with community, villages, but also, of course, with those other NGOs internationally that we can collaborate with and make a greater emphasis together.
From a personal point of view, why do you do it, and what is the motivation?
When you sit with a mother in Haiti who has just had a baby, just months old, and says, I can't feed my baby, will you take it? And say, no, I'm going to help you survive. Those are the people that float my boat. They put the wind in my sails, and they make me want to go back and help as much as possible, because at the end of the day, it's what you do for the people on the ground that really makes a difference. Empowering them, giving them hope, giving them the ability to live for another day with their baby in their arms or with their family at their side. So the release of joy that comes in giving a bag of rice. Small thing, but to me, it's a great moment in time.